Martel Holt appeared in a way people had never seen before, no longer confident or powerful, but tense, stressed, and almost broken. At the beginning, Tasha said, "Some truths don't disappear. They wait for the right moment to come out," and that one line set the tone for everything that followed. The footage showed Martel sitting in his car outside Melody Shari's home, holding his phone and looking angry and frustrated, showing the same stubborn behavior he had been known for, but this time the situation felt far more serious. This wasn't a new conflict between Martel and Melody, it was the result of years of tension. However, things had now gone beyond a personal relationship and turned into a legal and emotional battle about respect, boundaries, and truth. Melody finally decided she would no longer stay silent and went to court with her lawyer, carrying evidence and determined to end this chapter of her life. When asked if she wanted revenge, she clearly said she only wanted peace and closure. But peace did not come easily. Outside the courthouse, reporters and cameras surrounded them as Martel arrived in a suit and sunglasses, though his confidence seemed gone, while Melody appeared calm and focused in white. Inside the courtroom, Martel denied all accusations, but his claims were challenged when video evidence was presented showing him repeatedly near Melody's home despite restrictions, along with other tense interactions. The judge made it clear that the case would be decided based on facts, not emotions. After the hearing, Melody left quietly without speaking to the media, but later received a message from Tasha K saying that the world had seen her silence and now truth was speaking for her. Soon after, social media exploded with support for Melody, as many praised her strength while others still defended Martel. The situation escalated further when an audio clip surfaced of Martel angrily refusing to accept defeat and claiming he would take everything back, which damaged his image even more. As public opinion shifted, Melody focused on rebuilding her life and started a foundation called Embrace by Melody to help women escape toxic relationships. She explained that it was not about revenge, but about survival and empowerment, and her words gained widespread attention. Meanwhile, Martel tried defending himself through interviews and live videos, insisting he was the victim, but each attempt only made public criticism worse. His business deals collapsed, partnerships ended, and his reputation continued to fall apart. Eventually, under growing pressure and isolation, he stepped away from social media and disappeared from public view. Melody, on the other hand, continued moving forward quietly, focusing on her children and her work, later posting a simple message saying she lives the truth instead of selling it. That message went viral and sparked widespread debate. As the legal case continued in court involving custody and financial issues, Melody made it clear that her fight was over and it was now time for truth to take its place. In the end, the story became bigger than just a personal conflict. It became a reflection of accountability, healing, and transformation, where Melody moved forward with strength while Martel was left facing the consequences of his actions. After that statement, the atmosphere around the entire case slowly began to change. The courtroom no longer felt like just a place for conflict between two people, but like the center of a much bigger public discussion. Every update from the case spread quickly online, and every detail was picked apart by viewers, bloggers, and media outlets. Melody, however, stayed away from the noise as much as she could. She focused on her children, her healing, and the growth of her foundation, choosing peace over attention. Even when her name was trending, she rarely responded, letting her actions speak instead of her words. Martel's situation continued to worsen as time passed. With every new report, his public image took another hit. Opportunities that once came easily were now disappearing one after another. People who once supported him began distancing themselves, and even his closest circle became smaller. The pressure of public opinion and legal challenges started to weigh heavily on him, and for the first time, he was no longer in control of how the world saw him. Meanwhile, Melody's foundation continued to grow, helping more women share their stories and rebuild their lives. Her message of strength through silence and survival through truth began to reach a wider audience. She was invited to speak at events, featured in interviews, and slowly became seen not just as someone involved in a public dispute, but as a voice for healing and resilience. As the final court decisions approached, tension remained high, but the energy around Melody had shifted. She was no longer focused on proving anything to anyone. Instead, she had already moved into a new phase of her life where peace mattered more than victory. Martel, on the other hand, was left dealing with the consequences of past decisions, facing both legal and personal struggles that continued to isolate him further. In the end, when the final rulings were discussed, there was no dramatic celebration or public confrontation from Melody. She simply accepted the outcome quietly and moved forward. The story that once seemed centered on conflict slowly turned into a story about growth, accountability, and transformation. And while the world continued to debate who was right or wrong, Melody had already stepped into a new chapter, one defined not by the past, but by the future she was building for herself and her children. As time moved forward, the noise that once surrounded the case slowly began to fade, but its impact still lingered in different ways. The media had moved on to new stories, yet the names involved were still occasionally brought up whenever discussions about accountability, relationships, and public image came up online. Melody, however, remained consistent in her new direction. She kept her focus on her foundation, expanding its reach and continuing to support women who were trying to rebuild their lives after difficult experiences. Her work became more structured, more recognized, and more impactful, turning what started as a personal mission into a growing movement. She also became more selective about where she appeared publicly. Instead of reacting to rumors or revisiting the past, she chose to highlight progress, healing, and education around emotional well-being. Over time, people stopped seeing her only through the lens of the conflict and began recognizing her as someone who had turned pain into purpose. Her calm approach, even under pressure, became one of the most talked about parts of her journey. Martel's life, on the other hand, remained complicated. Although the headlines slowed down, the consequences of everything that had happened did not disappear overnight. Rebuilding trust, both personally and professionally, proved difficult. The opportunities he once had access to did not return easily, and every attempt to re-enter the public space was met with mixed reactions. Some people still followed his updates, but the overwhelming attention had shifted elsewhere. Inside his personal life, things remained quiet but heavy. The absence of public attention did not necessarily bring peace, but instead created space for reflection and isolation. Those close to him could see the weight of everything he had gone through, especially the loss of reputation and stability he once had. Still, he remained distant from public conversations about the situation, avoiding direct engagement with the narrative that had defined him for so long. Meanwhile, Melody's journey continued to evolve in a very different direction. Her foundation grew beyond expectations, connecting with communities in different places and building partnerships with organizations focused on women's empowerment and mental health support. She began to speak less about what she had been through and more about what others could build after their struggles. That shift made her message even stronger, as it was no longer centered on one story, but on many. Over time, what once felt like a public storm slowly transformed into two separate paths. One was marked by rebuilding, healing, and forward movement, while the other was marked by consequence, reflection, and quiet withdrawal from the spotlight. The world continued to interpret the story in different ways, but for those directly involved, life had already moved into a new phase. And in that new phase, the most important change was not what people said online or what the media reported, but the fact that life had continued beyond the moment that once felt like the center of everything. In the weeks that followed, the final court chapter brought a strange kind of stillness instead of closure. There was no public celebration, no loud reactions, just the quiet reality that both lives had already started moving in different directions long before the legal process fully ended. Melody remained focused on her work and her children, keeping her routine simple and intentional. She avoided getting pulled back into public arguments or responding to ongoing speculation, choosing instead to protect her peace and the stability she had worked hard to rebuild. Her foundation continued to expand, gaining support from different communities and organizations that aligned with her mission. What started as a personal response to pain had now turned into a structured effort to help others heal. Women from different backgrounds began sharing their stories through her platform, and that sense of shared experience became the core of its growth. Melody's presence in these spaces was calm but impactful, as she focused more on listening and guiding rather than speaking about the past. Meanwhile, Martel's life continued on a quieter, more uncertain path. Without the constant attention of media and public discussion, his world became more private but also more isolating. Attempts to rebuild his image faced difficulty, as trust once lost proved hard to regain. Even when he stayed away from controversy, the history surrounding him followed quietly, shaping how people reacted to anything connected to his name. Over time, both lives settled into a different rhythm. The intensity that once surrounded them faded into memory, replaced by distance and separate growth. Melody moved further into a space of stability and purpose, while Martel remained in a process of reflection and adjustment, dealing with the long-term effects of everything that had unfolded. Eventually, the story that once dominated conversations became just another example of how quickly public attention can rise and fall. But for those involved, it left something deeper behind, not just headlines or opinions, but a turning point that permanently changed the direction of their lives. As life continued moving forward, the contrast between their paths became even more noticeable, even if the public attention had faded. Melody's routine became steady and grounded. She focused on her foundation, her children, and building a life that was no longer shaped by conflict, but by purpose. Each step she took seemed intentional, as if she was rebuilding not just her image, but her entire sense of peace from the ground up. Over time, she became more comfortable living outside the spotlight, only stepping into public view when it truly aligned with her mission rather than past drama. Her work began reaching deeper communities, and the stories shared through her platform reflected real healing and transformation. People connected with her not because of what she had gone through, but because of how she had chosen to move forward from it. That shift slowly changed how she was seen, turning her from a figure in a public dispute into someone associated with strength, recovery, and direction. On the other side, Martel's journey remained quieter and more complicated. Without the constant attention, there were no headlines to define him daily, but the weight of his past still lingered in the background of his life. Rebuilding anything meaningful, whether personal or professional, required time, patience, and trust that was not easily given. Even in moments of silence, the history attached to his name continued to influence how people responded to him. There were attempts to move forward, but they came with challenges that didn't disappear just because the cameras were gone. Isolation became more common, and reflection became unavoidable. The absence of public attention created space for thought, but also space for consequences to settle in more deeply. As both lives continued in separate directions, the emotional distance between their past and present grew wider. What once felt like an ongoing storm eventually turned into memory, still present, but no longer controlling every moment. Melody kept building forward while Martel worked through the weight of what had already passed. In the end, their story no longer lived in headlines or online debates. It lived in the quieter reality that followed, the part where life does not stop after conflict, but continues in different forms, shaped by the choices made along the way and the paths each person decides to walk next. In the quiet that followed, both lives continued in ways that no longer depended on public opinion. Melody's world became more structured and peaceful with time. Her foundation grew into a stable platform that not only supported women in difficult situations, but also created long-term programs focused on education, emotional recovery, and financial independence. She stopped feeling the need to explain her past, and instead focused on building systems that helped others move beyond theirs. Even in interviews or public appearances, she kept her tone steady and purposeful, always redirecting attention toward growth rather than conflict. Her personal life also became more balanced. The constant pressure of public attention faded, allowing her to focus on her children and create a more stable environment for them. The absence of drama did not feel empty to her. Instead, it created space for clarity. She no